Hello everybody. One of the questions the organizers of this webinar put to us was about the aim of our training activities. I hold classes in simultaneous and consecutive interpreting. Based on what during my professional practice as a conference interpreter have experienced to be the challenges and difficulties and the thrill of interpreting, it is my aim to provide students with the skills and tools they need to cope with these challenges, in order for them to interpret as well as is possible. This covers linguistic and translatological aspects, as well as questions of professional practice and professional ethics. Now, what are these skills and tools? An excellent command of one's working languages is, of course, a prerequisite for interpreting. The focus of interpreting classes, however, is not on language teaching, which tends to be a byproduct. Much more at the heart of our work are questions of understanding, with two aspects to it. A, the actual listening comprehension, including learning to cope with different speakers, not only the teacher reading a text, with different speaking rates, accents, styles, and even such seemingly trivial things as poor sound quality, background noise and interruptions, as working conditions in the real world are quite often far from the perfect idyll of Germersheim. And B, analytical comprehension, mining for the content of the message. In the process of listening, students are trained to get an idea of the logical, argumentative structure of the text and the rhetorical devices used, to be aware of who the speaker is addressing his words to, their allusions, their compliments, their praise, their attacks, to be aware of their overall and maybe hidden aim, in order to understand not only what the speakers are saying, but what they actually mean to say. This is a task impossible to accomplish without being able to put the message into its political, social, and cultural contexts. Finally, when it comes to rephrasing in the target language of what they have understood, students should be aware not only of who they are interpreting, but also of who they are interpreting for. Is it a negotiating delegation, a youth group, a broad TV audience, a small panel of experts, in order to appropriately phrase the message for their target audience? They are encouraged to develop a proper degree of output control, with respect not only to wording, but also to coherence, delivery, intonation, tone of voice, etc. When choosing the texts we work on, by the way, in line with my overall practice-based approach, I prefer texts from real life to textbooks. I'm careful to ensure that there is a continuous progression of difficulty and complexity in language, structure, and content. Mind you, the main criteria are not whether I myself or the students may find the topic interesting. I'm glad if they do, but interpreters have to deal with a lot of subjects they at first sight may not find interesting at all, and still have to invest a lot of time and work into them, only to find out later that almost everything can be interesting once you get acquainted with it. Therefore, I try to present to students a wide variety of themes, quite like the everyday working life of a conference interpreter, and make the preparation for it part of the teaching process. Another point that is not a criterion for choice of texts is political orientation. In fact, I make a point of having the students interpret statements from completely contrary points of view. Have them interpret Svetlana Alexievich as well as Putin, the Russian representative in the UN Security Council speaking on the Crimea, as well as the response of this Ukrainian counterpart, almost at each other's throats. Or sometimes I deliberately choose texts that are in complete opposition to the mainstream attitudes in the respective countries. For instance, have German-raised female students convincingly interpret anti-feminist comments by conservative representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church? Or have Russian-raised students interpret statements of LGBT activists? I'm quite aware that this may put students under enormous emotional pressure. We had a student from Russia who refused outright to interpret such texts. But I try to cushion this by making them reflect on the necessity to shift perspectives and leave aside one's own point of view, as interpreters so often have to in performing their work. And of course we use issues like these as a starting point for reflections on the role of the interpreter. In discussing the various solutions the students arrive at, it is my fundamental belief that, as a rule, there is no such thing as the one and only correct solution. Typically, there are quite a number of correct, appropriate, good ways of putting it. And the challenging and decisive task is, A, to find the dividing line between acceptable versus unacceptable, and B, give the reasons for it. The lecturer should be able to suggest a good solution, but not as a dogma, which is true just because the teacher says so. I find these discussions very challenging and rewarding, because sometimes the students and I get into incredibly fine nuances and subtle shades of meaning. And this, by the way, being a strong point in favor of directionality in teaching. All interpreting teachers in Germersheim, while as interpreters working into their respective A as well as their B languages, give classes only into their A language. And we are happy that our staff covers all the language pairs needed. Thank you.